Look at the camera and smile.
25 banned movies, 7 levels. This is an iceberg of the most disturbing banned movies ever made. Some were pulled after just one screening. From notorious cult classics to films buried by censorship, we're digging into the darkest vaults of cinema history. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange was a full-blown cultural grenade. People called it the ticking bomb, and not just because of its graphic violence or mature themes. The media storm that followed ended up getting the film effectively banned in the UK, and that's not an exaggeration. The story centers on Alex Delarge, played by Malcolm McDowell. This teenage sociopath is obsessed with Beethoven and, well, beating the hell out of people for fun. Alex and his gang roam the streets at night in their creepy white jumpsuits and bowler hats just because they can. One of the most infamous scenes involves Alex breaking into a couple's home and tormenting them while cheerfully singing to Singin' in the Rain. It's chilling how they turn a happy tune into something that makes your skin crawl.
Just singing in the rain.
Eventually, Alex gets caught. Instead of just throwing him in prison, the government uses him as a guinea pig for a bizarre rehabilitation experiment called the Ludovico technique. He's strapped to a chair, eyes clamped open, and forced to watch endless footage of violence while his favorite Beethoven piece plays in the background. They basically rewire his brain, so every time he feels violent urges, he's hit with unbearable nausea and pain. People freaked out. There were reports of copycat crimes, and some even dressed like Alex when committing them. The backlash hit hard. Critics, politicians, and even the police started pointing fingers at Kubrick, saying he'd unleashed something dangerous. 2 years later, Kubrick himself pulled the film from circulation in the UK after receiving death threats. He banned it, not the government. It stayed off screens in Britain for 27 years. Ireland banned it until 2000. Singapore kept it locked down for over 30 years. Brazil chopped it up. South Africa and Canada slapped on heavy restrictions. Level 2. Them. The setup's simple but terrifying. A French couple, Clementine and Lucas, moved to a remote countryside house near Bucharest. They're looking for peace, a break from the noise of city life. But what they get is something way darker. The peaceful and quiet life they dreamed of turns into a fight for survival. One night they're woken up by strange sounds, loud music blasting from nowhere, footsteps inside the walls, whispers in the dark. At first it's disorienting, then it hits them. Someone else is there. From that moment on, it's a pure nightmare, starting with flickering lights, running taps, the TV switching on, and someone tampering with their car. The unexplainable events only get more intense. Soon they're forced to flee the house, chased by hooded figures through the dark woods. They end up in this eerie underground tunnel system where things only get more twisted. And just when you think it can't get worse, there's a twist. The intruders? Not some gang of grown psychopaths. They're kids, teenagers, maybe even younger, hooded, faceless, relentless. When Clementine asks why they wanted to harm them, the intruders answer, "Why don't you play with us?" The film ends as 4 hooded children emerge from the woods and run for a bus. The on-screen text reveals that the bodies of Clementine and Lucas were found 5 days later. The suspects were arrested, and when asked to explain their actions, the youngest of the group simply said they wouldn't play with us. Even though the movie was marketed as based on true events, there's really no hard evidence. It's more urban legend than reality, but that doesn't make it any less chilling. Borat, 2006. When people talk about banned movies, it's usually because they're bloody, violent, or just too stomach-churning. But Borat? That's a whole different kind of nightmare. It's not scary in the traditional sense. The movie follows Sacha Baron Cohen as Borat Sagdiyev, a ridiculous fictional Kazakh journalist traveling across the United States. His whole shtick? misogynistic comments, outrageous behavior, and outright anti-Semitism. It's designed to push people's buttons, and it worked.
I don't think that Americans would find that funny.
No, it is not a joke.
The oft-debated genius of it, and the horror, is that most of the people he interacts with aren't actors. They're real folks just being themselves, not realizing they're walking straight into Cohen's trap and exposing their true colors on camera. When it dropped in late 2006, the reaction was wild. Critics praised it, audiences laughed, sometimes nervously, and lawsuits started rolling in. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan was furious. Officials called it vile and malicious, shut down Borat's fake government website, and even threatened legal action against Cohen. They hated how the movie portrayed their country, backwards, absurd, and with jokes like running of the Jews festivals. They went so far as to buy a big glossy ad in the New York Times to show the real Kazakhstan and its achievements. And here's the twist, all that outrage backfired. The global spotlight actually boosted Kazakhstan's tourism big time. By 2012, visits to the country had surged. And in 2020, in a moment of irony so perfect it feels scripted, Kazakhstan's tourism board actually adopted Borat's once insulting catchphrase, "Very nice," as their official slogan.
Oh, very nice.
Very nice. What started as an insult turned into free advertising. Monty Python's Life of Brian, 1979. Released in 1979, Life of Brian is pure Monty Python chaos. The story follows Brian Cohen, an ordinary Jewish guy who just happens to be born next door to Jesus. Wrong place, wrong time. Through one absurd misunderstanding after another, crowds start believing he's the Messiah. Even though Brian spends the whole film insisting he's not, they won't believe him. His sharp-tongued mother isn't buying it either, but that doesn't stop mobs of followers from chasing him around like he's the second coming. Or, first coming, I guess. Along the way, Brian gets caught up with a ragtag separatist group that spends more time arguing about their group name than actually rebelling.
I want to be a woman. From now on, I want you all to call me Loretta. What? It's my right as a man.
He also runs into Pontius Pilate, who's played as this hilariously pompous official with a ridiculous speech impediment. Basically, the whole thing takes biblical stories we all know and flips them upside down into satire. However, for many viewers, the joke went too far. In the UK, even though censors gave it a rating that allowed teenagers 14 and up to watch, local councils revolted. 11 councils banned it completely, and nearly 30 others slapped it with an X rating, meaning only adults could see it. Religious groups weren't having it either. People picketed outside cinemas calling it blasphemous, and moral campaigners tried to have it wiped from existence altogether. The outrage didn't stop in Britain. Ireland banned it until 1987, Norway banned it outright, and Italy wouldn't show it for over a decade. Sweden, in classic cheeky fashion, advertised it with the tagline, "So funny it was banned in Norway. Ta det, era norska nordar." The controversy got so heated that John Cleese and Michael Palin had to defend the film on a live TV debate against critics and bishops who accused it of mocking religion. Their response? It wasn't about Jesus at all. It was about people, about how quickly crowds can turn into fanatics, and how blind devotion can make the absurd feel dangerous. And as usually happens, the controversy just made it bigger. Life of Brian went on to become one of the top-grossing films in Britain in 1979, and at the time, it was the most successful British comedy ever released in America. In the end, the church tried to bury it, but the laughs won out. You know, we cover more films that were considered too provocative for the public to handle, and if you want to see more content like that, well, hit that subscribe button and let's move on to the next level. Level 3. Funny Games, 1997 and 2007. Most horror movies want you to scream, then laugh, then feel relieved when the monster dies. Funny Games wants none of that. This is a horror film that almost punishes you for watching it. Directed by Michael Haneke, there are two versions of Funny Games, the 1997 Austrian original and the 2007 American remake starring Naomi Watts and Tim Roth. What's strange is that both films are nearly identical. Haneke remade his movie shot for shot, like a director daring the audience to sit through it twice. The setup sounds familiar. A family takes a vacation, Georg, his wife Anne, and their young son. Then two polite young men, Paul and Peter, visit them. At first, they appear harmless in their white gloves, but the intruders soon reveal themselves as sadistic psychopaths. They cripple Georg, taking the family hostage and subjecting them to cruel psychological games. But the way the story unfolds is anything but conventional. Haneke's goal wasn't to thrill audiences, it was to confront them. In one scene, Paul toys with Anne, forcing her to play a cruel game of hot and cold to find her dog Lucky. Then he looks straight into the camera and smirks, taunting you as if you're part of the game. Later, he goes even further, rewinding the film itself to erase the family's only chance at escape. The effect is brutal. Instead of cheering on violence like in most horror, you're forced to reckon with the fact that you're watching suffering in the comfort of your home. The original film earned a nomination for Palme d'Or at Cannes for its daring vision, but it also sparked outrage and walkouts. Critics were split. Some praised the film's bold critique of violent media, others hated it. Rotten Tomatoes still shows the remake at 53% approval. Crash, 1996. 1996's Crash is based on J.G. Ballard's controversial novel. It follows James Ballard, played by James Spader, a film producer whose life takes a sharp turn after a near-fatal car accident. But instead of trauma pushing him away from danger, he's pulled deeper into it. He meets Vaughn, an eerie, almost cult-like figure obsessed with car crashes. He drags James into an underground subculture of people who fetishize car crashes, obsessively watching car safety test videos and photographing traffic accident sites. They even restage famous celebrity crashes just to feed their obsession. He soon falls in with a cult of car crash fetishists and invites his wife Catherine to join in with them. Their obsession grows so reckless that James and Catherine begin staging crashes of their own. In one scene, James chases Catherine down the freeway at terrifying speeds. She unbuckles her seatbelt just as he slams into her car. In this film, adult scenes take place in the aftermath of disaster, in hospital rooms, inside wrecked cars, and surrounded by bruises and broken glass. David Cronenberg films it all with a chilling, detached style, forcing you to watch as technology and human intimacy are unfiltered. When Crash premiered at Cannes, it blew up, just not in the way most filmmakers would hope. Some critics walked out in disgust, calling it depraved and beyond morality. Even jury president Francis Ford Coppola reportedly couldn't decide whether it deserved recognition or condemnation. In the end, the jury gave it a special prize, but not for beauty or comfort, but for the pure audacity of it. El Topo, 1970. Alejandro Jodorowsky's 1970 El Topo is more an acid trip with cowboy hats than a movie. People call it a Western, but really it's chaotic, bloody, and mystical. It's sheer madness. No wonder it ended up banned in Mexico and worshipped at midnight screenings. It starts with what looks like a classic setup. A mysterious black-clad gunslinger rides through a barren desert. Classic Western vibe, until you notice his companion, his unclothed son. When three gunmen emerge, laughing and promising to harm the rider, the usual Western standoff is instantly transformed. That single detail of the child adds a deeply unsettling feeling of danger. What seems like a simple revenge story at first quickly becomes a wild spiritual journey. The desert isn't a place for gunfights, but a battle for the soul, as El Topo challenges four strange masters who represent different religions. And once you think you've figured out what kind of movie this is, Jodorowsky yanks the floor out from under you. The movie only gets stranger, leading him deep underground to a hidden world of outcasts, bizarre rituals, and a desperate search for redemption. This is no ordinary Western. It completely blew up the genre with dwarves, bizarre violence, and shocking religious images. The film mixes Eastern beliefs with Christian symbols, creating a strange world that either captivates you or horrifies you. It's not just a movie, it's a dare. Authorities in Mexico banned the film for its shocking violence and religious imagery, worried it would spark a cultural rebellion. But the censorship backfired and only made the movie a legend. It became a must-see midnight phenomenon in New York, with influential fans like John Lennon and Yoko Ono pushing for it. Lennon's manager, Alan Klein, not only got the film distributed, but also funded Jodorowsky's next project. Freaks, 1932. Released in 1932, saying Freaks shocked audiences is an understatement. Some people fainted and full-on protests erupted at screenings. Not because of gore or blood, but because Todd Browning cast real circus performers with physical disabilities and put them at the center of the story. The backlash was so intense that MGM quickly pulled the film and buried it for decades. The plot follows Hans, a little person who falls in love with Cleopatra, a trapeze artist. Cleopatra, however, just wants his money. So, with the help of Hercules, a brutish strongman, she plots to poison Hans and take everything he owns. What they don't expect is that the freaks, the so-called outcasts everyone laughs at, aren't powerless. They stick together, and when Hans collapses from the poison, they take revenge. The final act plays out in a rainstorm with mud, knives, and shadows crawling through the night. By the end, Cleopatra isn't beautiful anymore, she's the true monster. Some people ran out of theaters. Reports claimed viewers fainted. One woman even said the film made her miscarry. MGM panicked. They cut almost half an hour of footage, including a scene and a lightning-struck revenge sequence. Even then, it was still too much. Censorship hit just as hard. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification banned the movie outright in 1932, saying it was too offensive to show. When resubmitted in 1952, they banned it again. It wasn't until 1963 that it finally got an X rating, and only for limited release. Other countries pulled it too, afraid of public backlash, and the fallout was brutal for Todd Browning. He'd made one of the boldest, strangest films of the era, but it basically ended his career. Sisters, 1972. Brian De Palma was still a rising director in the early 1970s when he created Sisters. It immediately earned him a reputation as the new Hitchcock, but with a much darker, more dangerous twist. The story begins with Grace Collier, a young journalist who looks out of her apartment window and sees something she should never have witnessed: a man asking for help and eventually losing his life. And the suspect, her mysterious neighbor Danielle Breton, a French-Canadian model played by Margaret Kidder. But this isn't a simple cover-up. Danielle was once a conjoined twin, and the shadow of her sister Dominique might not be as dead as everyone believes. As Grace investigates, she's drawn into a nightmare of mind games and shady institutions, and De Palma's signature filmmaking tricks shine through. Split-screen tension, dizzying camera work, and a chilling score from Bernard Herrmann, the same composer who worked on Psycho. The result is a film that feels like Hitchcock turned inside out, more violent, more shocking, and laced with unease. But beneath the blood and suspense, Sisters also takes aim at something bigger. Grace's warnings and evidence are dismissed at every turn by police, by doctors, by men in power who refuse to take her seriously. In one of the film's most haunting moments, she collapses with proof in her hands, ignored simply because she's a woman. Critics like Robin Wood later argued that the true horror wasn't the twisted twin at all, it was the society that silences women. Upon release, Sisters stunned audiences and earned praise from critics like Roger Ebert, who noted that it wasn't just a Hitchcock homage, but a bold work of its own. Over time, it's become a cult classic, both for its technical daring and its psychological depth. Level 4. The Devils, 1971. In 1971, Ken Russell's film The Devils was so shocking that it was both banned and aggressively buried. It was condemned as blasphemous, obscene, and downright dangerous. The story is set in 17th century France and follows Father Urbain Grandier, played by Oliver Reed, a Catholic priest who openly defies Cardinal Richelieu's growing political power. But when Sister Jeanne, a hunchbacked prioress played by Vanessa Redgrave, becomes lustfully obsessed with him, her fantasies lead to accusations of demonic possession. That spark sets off a mass hysteria. Nuns convulsing, screaming, and claiming possession as authorities seize on the chaos as the perfect excuse to destroy Grandier. The depraved plot wasn't the only thing that made the film eerie, it was the imagery. Russell didn't hold back. In one scene, dozens of unclothed nuns writhe around a statue of Christ in a frenzied, lustful ritual. In another, Grandier is subjected to extreme suffering and burned at the stake while crowds cheer. These moments were so extreme that censors around the world demanded cuts. The British Board of Film Censors forced edits, Warner Brothers locked the uncut version away, and countries like Italy and Finland banned it outright. But over its shocking moments, The Devils has a powerful political message. Russell used the hysteria of the French region of Loudun to express how the church and state weaponized fear, sexuality, and moral panic to crush anyone who speaks out. Critics were split. Some called it sacrilegious filth, others recognized it as one of the boldest films ever made. Raw, 2016. When Julia Ducournau's Raw premiered, the fallout wasn't just applause and awards, people literally fainted. At the Toronto International Film Festival, multiple audience members collapsed during screenings, and some were even rushed to the hospital. That's how intense this film was. On the surface, Raw is a coming-of-age story, but beyond that, it's one of the most banned body horror films of the last decade. The film follows Justine, a young veterinary student and lifelong vegetarian. But during a brutal hazing ritual, she's forced to eat raw rabbit kidney. That single bite awakens her uncontrollable craving for flesh. First animal, then human. Her transformation isn't merely about hunger. It collides with her sexuality, her identity, and her relationships with her sister. In one of the film's most infamous moments, Justine's sister Alexia is giving her a bikini wax when a horrific accident occurs. Alexia tries to remove the stubborn wax with scissors and accidentally slices off her own finger. As Alexia faints from the pain, Justine stares at the bloody stump, picks up the severed finger, and eats it. Later, when Alexia catches her, Justine lies to their parents and blames the family dog. Ducournau calls her approach flesh fascination, shaped by her childhood as the daughter of two doctors. Her camera treats the body not with disgust, but with clinical intimacy, forcing audiences to stare at every vein, every cut, every raw piece of meat. Raw premiered at Cannes in 2016, winning the Fipresci Prize, and later took home the Sutherland Award for Originality. Critics hailed it as part of the new French extremity, a wave of films unflinching in their depictions of the body and violence. Dead Alive, 1992. Peter Jackson directed what's still considered one of the goriest films ever made, Dead Alive, released internationally as Brain Dead. It was so over the top with blood and torsos scattered that entire countries banned it outright. Set in 1950s Wellington, the film follows Lionel Cosgrove, a timid young man trapped under the thumb of his controlling mother, Vera. But when she's bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey at the zoo, things take a horrific turn. Vera transforms into a ravenous, flesh-eating zombie, and Lionel's desperate attempt to keep her hidden sparks a chain reaction of carnage. From there, the film snowballs into pure chaos. Zombies multiply, bodies explode, guts crawl across the floor like they're alive, and in the unforgettable climax, Lionel straps a lawnmower to his chest and plows through an entire horde of the undead, drenching the set in rivers of blood and severed limbs. But the extremity came at a cost. Dead Alive was banned, censored, or chopped apart in multiple countries. Germany didn't just ban it, they made owning the uncut version illegal, with copies confiscated under laws against extreme depictions of violence. Singapore, South Korea, and Finland banned it too, though Finland eventually lifted the ban in 2001. In the US, two very different versions circulated: a heavily cut R-rated version at 85 minutes, and an unrated version closer to Jackson's intent, which fans continue to seek out. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's low-budget horror masterpiece, The Evil Dead, was unleashed in 1981. Shot with a small, dedicated crew in a remote Tennessee cabin, the film became a relentless nightmare that shocked audiences worldwide. It was so intense that it became one of the infamous video nasties in Britain, a film initially banned and heavily censored for its gruesome content. The story follows Ashley "Ash" Williams, who heads to a remote cabin for a fun getaway with his girlfriend and 3 friends. Their trip takes a horrifying turn when they discover the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. The group accidentally unleashes a flood of evil, turning their weekend escape into a fight for survival. From there, the film becomes a terrifying experience, with never-ending possessions, screams, and gruesome practical effects. A pencil jammed into an ankle, eyes gouged out, heads hacked apart with axes. The film never lets up. Ash is forced to watch as his friends become possessed one by one, leaving him with a difficult choice: kill them or be killed himself. VHS made it more infamous than the box office did. In the UK, The Evil Dead dominated home video sales, but it also became the target of moral campaigner Mary Whitehouse, who branded it the #1 nasty. Politicians even screened its bloodiest scenes in Parliament, warning it could corrupt society. And in one bizarre claim, even dogs. The backlash turned into full censorship. The BBFC initially cut nearly a minute from the theatrical release, but on VHS the film spread uncut, sparking seizures, prosecutions, and its addition to the official Video Nasties blacklist. Under the 1984 Video Recordings Act, another 66 seconds were censored for its 1990 home video release. Fans had to wait almost 2 decades before the film was finally cleared, restored, and re-released uncut in 2000 to 2001. Blood Feast, 1963. The film opens with a caution. This film is not for the faint of heart, and it immediately delivers. Blood Feast doesn't tease the horror, it forces you to watch every gruesome detail, from a woman's leg being hacked apart to her tongue being ripped out. Every cut and gush of bright red blood is shown in vivid, shocking detail. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, it's widely regarded as the very first splatter film. The story follows Fuad Ramses, a deranged caterer who harmed women for their body parts. He is preparing a blood feast to resurrect the ancient goddess Ishtar. In an ancient horrific ritual, women were once sacrificed on an altar and their body parts were then cooked and served. This gruesome feast was said to bring about Ishtar's rebirth. Now Ramses is doing the same, serving human flesh to his unsuspecting guests. Hoping to make the gore as realistic as possible, director Herschel Gordon Lewis used real animal organs as props. On set, animal tongue and various entrails made the scenes even more unsettling. Lewis's concept for the film started after Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho hit theaters. He felt the film had cheated by showing the results of the murders in the film, but not the action. So he went against every rule the censors had, putting every gruesome detail on screen for the world to see. The end result was a film that was crude and totally unforgettable, forever changing the face of horror. And he got his wish. Censors hated it. The UK banned the film outright, and decades later, it became the oldest movie on the infamous Video Nasties list during the 1980s moral panic. The Green Inferno, 2013. Eli Roth's horror film, The Green Inferno, sparked a ton of controversy. The gruesome and graphic content was one thing, but it mostly came from its portrayal of indigenous peoples as bloodthirsty savages. Shot deep in the Peruvian and Chilean jungle, the story follows Justine and a group of idealistic college students from New York. They join an activist collective to protest illegal deforestation in the Amazon. They chain themselves to bulldozers, live stream the stunt, and briefly taste victory when the loggers are forced to stand down. But as they fly home, their plane crashes in the middle of the jungle. The survivors celebrate being alive until they're captured by a local tribe. That's when the real nightmare begins. The tribe greets them not as guests, but as prey. The students are caged and subjected to gruesome rituals, and what happens next is pure splatter horror. Ritual killings, dismemberments, and scenes of so graphic they earned the film outright bans in Malaysia and cuts in other countries. With real indigenous villagers as extras, the film was widely criticized for promoting racist stereotypes, sparking an outcry from human rights organizations. Critics also slammed Roth for suggesting the tribe practiced female genital, something not associated with Amazon cultures. Roth defended the film as satire, claiming it mocked the hypocrisy of social media-driven slacktivism, where privileged outsiders try to save communities they don't understand. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. The family trailer is ripped apart. Terrifying screams. Flames rise as mutants tear into the Carter family, harming and feasting on their victims. This was Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes, a film so brutal it was nearly slapped with an X rating. The film follows the Carter family, a suburban family that takes a wrong turn in the Nevada desert and breaks down near an old nuclear test site. But they're not alone. Watching them from the hills is Jupiter and his clan. Mutants, cannibals, people twisted by fallout and abandonment. When the Carters realize they're being hunted, it's already too late. One by one, the family is attacked, their trailer is set on fire, and survival becomes the only thing that matters. Craven tapped into real fears from the 1970s: nuclear testing, government neglect, and what happens when the so-called civilized world collides with the forgotten and deformed people it leaves behind. The mutants aren't mindless monsters. They're the mirror image of the Carters, families willing to kill to protect their own. But the violence pushed society's limits. The MPAA demanded cuts, forcing Craven to tone down scenes like Fred's brutal death, the savage attack on the trailer, and Jupiter's blood-soaked end. In the UK, it was thrown onto the Video Nasties list, censored for years before finally being released uncut in 2003. Even with the controversy, the movie exploded. Made for less than $700,000, it grossed around $25 million worldwide. Critics praised it for its tension, its bleak humor, and its willingness to push horror into places that felt uncomfortably real. Level 5. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Another Wes Craven film earns a spot in Level 5 with his debut film, The Last House on the Left. Released in 1972, this movie was such a cultural gut punch that irate viewers at one screening attempted to break into the projection booth to destroy the film. The story follows Marie and her friend Phyllis, two teenage girls who go out for a night of fun. But their evening takes a horrific turn when a gang of escaped convicts kidnaps them. In a brutal series of events, one girl loses her life and the other is viciously harmed. Seeking refuge, the convicts unknowingly end up at the home of one of their victims, Marie's parents. As the grieving parents uncover the horrifying truth about their daughter's disappearance, they unleash a morally ambiguous and violent revenge of their own. The movie is truly difficult to watch. Parts of what make it so harsh is its amateurish look, the grainy and shaky camera which makes everything feel uncomfortably real. It's a movie filled with brutal violence and gore that audiences just weren't prepared for. When Wes Craven made the movie, he thought it would be a small movie that no one would see, but he was wrong. Clever ads like radio commercials that told people to chant, "It's only a movie," made it a big hit. Even famous movie critic Roger Ebert liked it, saying it was brutal and tragic, but also important because it showed real horror instead of hiding it. Level 6. Grotesque, 2008. Released in 2008, the Japanese horror film Grotesque, directed by Koji Shiraishi, quickly earned a reputation not just for being brutal, but for what it seemed to say about where horror cinema was headed. The UK banned it entirely, which hardly ever happened anymore. That decision sparked a whole wave of debate around censorship, artistic limits, and what horror is even supposed to be for. Unlike more mainstream gruesome horror films, which at least try to wrap their gore in some kind of storyline or twisted morality, Grotesque doesn't really bother. There's no backstory, no clear character development, no real plot arc. It's just raw, relentless violence put out there with almost clinical precision. Watching it feels less like a movie and more like an endurance test. That stripped-down approach was a big shift. Some people saw it as a bold experiment, others were understandably not impressed. To them, it looked like horror had hit a dead end, no artistry, just shock for shock's sake. Ironically, the UK ban probably gave Grotesque way more attention than it might have gotten otherwise. Suddenly it was being talked about alongside those notorious video nasties from the 80s that had been targeted by censors. The movie became a kind of legend, not because people had seen it, but because they weren't allowed to. Looking back, Grotesque isn't really about plot, it's more about what it exposed, like how much can an audience take? When does horror stop being art and start being exploitation? Whether you think it was just empty provocation or a serious statement about the genre's limits, it definitely left a mark. Irreversible, 2002. Irreversible is a famous French thriller film released in 2002 that tells its story in reverse. Opening with brutal vengeance and winding back to a 9-minute unbroken scene of violence that made many audience members walk out in shock. The film opens in chaos. Pierre and Marcus are inside a Paris nightclub looking for a man for revenge. Marcus then takes a life in one of cinema's most infamous scenes, smashing his face with a fire extinguisher in a single unbroken shot. From there, the story moves backwards, revealing the source of their vengeance. Marcus's girlfriend, Alex, played by Monica Bellucci, was taken advantage of in a pedestrian underpass, filmed in a 9-minute static take with no music and no cutaways. Then the film gradually works backwards toward innocence and love. By the time we reach the final scene, a quiet, sunlit glimpse of Alex, happy and carefree, we're burdened with the weight of everything the story has already revealed. Noy's directing style is as confrontational as his narrative. Long takes, swirling handheld movements, and disorienting camera spins create a suffocating atmosphere that mirrors the emotional turmoil of his characters. The infamous tunnel scene, filmed in a single uninterrupted shot, became one of the most discussed moments in 21st century cinema. This wasn't only for its content, but for what it revealed about the line between artistic provocation and exploitation. The cultural fallout was immediate. The UK gave it an 18 and over rating without any cuts, arguing that even though it was deeply gruesome, it handled the subject matter seriously. Other countries were much stricter, with some banning the film entirely. Many worried it would re-traumatize viewers, while others argued that editing it would take away its entire point. When it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2002, the reaction was total chaos. Some people walked out in horror, while others gave Noé a standing ovation for his bravery. Some critics called it brilliant exploration of time and violence, while others labeled it as torment and said it went too far just to be shocking. Saw 3D, 2010. Released in 2010, Saw 3D was instantly banned in Germany, restricted in France, and even had its trailer pulled off UK television after a child complained it was too frightening. Saw 3D is the 7th installment of the Saw franchise. The movie follows Bobby Dagan, an author who has become a local celebrity by lying about being a survivor of the Jigsaw Killer's games. But his fame comes with a deadly price. He finds himself trapped in a real game where he must save his wife. Meanwhile, a different game is being played. Jigsaw's ex-wife, Jill Tuck, tells the police that a rogue detective, Mark Hoffman, is behind all the recent murders.
There's a new game going on.
The police begin a manhunt to find him, hoping to put an end to the games once and for all. Saw 3D went all in on the gore, showcasing some of the most sadistic and over-the-top traps in the franchise's history. One of the most shocking scenes traps 3 men in a publicly visible glass box as buzzsaws descend, forcing a horrified crowd to watch a live, bloody execution. Another infamous moment takes place in a garage where a man is glued to a car seat. To save his friends from being crushed, decapitated, and flattened, he has to rip his own skin off, a gruesome task he fails to accomplish. The film shows every brutal death in graphic 3D detail, leaving nothing to the imagination. The film hit theaters in the United States and Canada on October 29, 2010, and while it was a box office hit, raking in $136.2 million worldwide, it was not well received by critics. For fans, Saw 3D was the ultimate spectacle of gore, but for censors around the world, it was simply too much. France took an extreme measure, completely revoking the film's distribution license until it could be re-evaluated. In the UK, while the movie itself was allowed to be shown uncut, its trailer was banned from airing before 9 p.m. after a 10-year-old found it too distressing. Level 7. Holocaust, 1980. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, Holocaust follows a documentary crew that vanishes in the Amazon rainforest while trying to film so-called savage tribes. The rescue team later finds their footage, and what they see is horrifying. Staged, brutal violence, and them all made to look like they were real. Because it was shot in a grainy documentary style, the film felt so real that many people genuinely believed it was a true crime film. People thought the actors actually died on camera. The controversy exploded immediately. In Italy, Deodato was arrested for and to prove that the actors were alive, he had to bring them into court, breaking the contracts he had with them to stay out of the public eye for a year. Only then were the charges dropped. However, the animal scenes were indeed real, and they were all harmed on camera, which sparked outrage that still exists today. Deodato was later found guilty of obscenity and animal cruelty, though he avoided jail time. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. Men Behind the Sun is a film that depicts the raw and brutal real-life horrors of World War II, where prisoners were used as human guinea pigs for so-called scientific research. One of the most haunting moments in the film happens when a group of young Japanese boys who are part of the Youth Corps become friends with a young mute Chinese boy. They play games with him and treat him like a little brother. But then their commanders order them to bring the boy into the facility. Believing he'll be safe, the boys obey, only to watch in horror as he is experimented on in a most horrifying way. The documentary-style film doesn't hold back on gruesome imagery. We see conscious prisoners being vivisected, chemical weapons being tested on people, and frostbite experiments where frozen flesh shatters like glass. There's also the infamous scene where a live cat is thrown into a room filled with starving rats. The backlash was immediate. Australia banned the film outright. In Europe, many releases were heavily censored, and in Japan, director T.F. Mao even received death threats. The controversy went deeper than the graphic special effects. It was because the film forced Japan to face one of its darkest wartime secrets. For some, it was nothing more than exploitation, turning real war crimes into a grotesque spectacle. But for others, it was a necessary and brutal reminder of the inhumane actions of the Japanese Army's Unit 731, forcing audiences to look at history instead of turning away. August Underground, 2001. August Underground is a budget film directed by Fred Vogel. It was shot on grainy, shaky VHS that feels less like a film but raw crime footage you were never meant to see. There's no distance, no music, no structure to guide you through the horror. It strips away everything familiar about movies, leaving only chaos on tape. Viewers genuinely questioned if it was real. That unsettling, almost too real vibe is exactly what pushed August Underground into infamy, cementing it as one of the most notorious underground horror films ever made. The plot, if you can even call it that, follows Peter, played by director Fred Vogel himself, and some unnamed partner who's always behind the camera. Peter's brutality started with a woman named Laura. He kept her captive, beaten, humiliated, and in agony in his basement until she finally died. From there, the two escalate their violence, taking the life of an elderly woman in her house and intimidating a convenience store owner. Their spree continues to a tattoo parlor where they capture two brothers, them, and finally beat them to death. With a limited budget, Vogel decided to get rid of things like a story or good cinematography. All that's left is pure, unflinching brutality meant to mimic reality. The camera lingers on the victims, making you feel like you're watching a real crime unfold. This effect was so convincing that August Underground has often been mistaken for a real. Over time, it became kind of a legend in underground horror circles. It wasn't something you picked up at Blockbuster. You heard about it from a friend, got a bootleg VHS or sketchy DVD, and maybe even felt a little guilty owning it. That sense of, should I even be watching this, gave it an edge that made it unforgettable for horror fans. The controversy helped too. In 2004, Australian customs officials seized copies of its sequel, August Underground's Mortem, calling it offensive to standards of morality and decency. However, bans and seizures only fueled its cult status. A year later, Vogel himself was detained at Canadian Customs while bringing the trilogy to a horror festival. Authorities confiscated the films under obscenity laws, sparking international headlines. He wasn't charged in the end, but the media ran with it. If you want more horrifying icebergs, you should check out our next video on the most disturbing banned movies ever made.